Time now for Konrad's Car Clinic, and we're going to go in a little bit more technical direction today.
Well, you had asked for some information about, you asked me to do something that was more detail-oriented,
Yes.
and you talked about piston rings.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to talk about how piston rings work, but also how they have changed over the last 10 years. And a lot of that change is all done by the manufacturers trying to get better fuel economy in a vehicle. So back in the late 90s, they went with something called a low-tension piston ring, which just means the outward force of the ring, because a piston ring is basically, my simplified version of it is a spring that's spreading outwards, so it scrapes the cylinder wall to keep the gasoline up here and the oil down here. Well, in the late 90s, they went with what's called a low-tension piston ring, which really complicated things. And they're used in pretty much everything now, but we're going to talk about how it works in a gasoline direct injected engine. I started with this picture here to show you what's the difference between a port fuel injected engine and a gasoline directed injected engine. And it's really about where's the fuel injector. In a port fuel engine, the fuel injector is behind the intake valve, spraying fuel into the intake port. In a GDI engine, it's actually down inside the combustion chamber. And because it's down inside the combustion chamber, the fuel pressure had to be raised on a GDI engine. So on a port fuel engine, you had fuel pressures probably in the 60, 70 PSI range. In a GDI engine, you now have fuel pressures up over 2,000 PSI. The other thing that happened in the GDI itself is the compression ratio has gone up. So because the compression ratio has gone up, that forced the ring performance to have to improve as well. Again, to keep the combustion gases up top, pushing the piston down, and the oil underneath. Well, in that, you're also seeing compression ratios in the what used to be a high compression was 11-to-1. Well, now you're seeing some of these engines that are 12, 13, 14, 15, 18-to-1 compression ratios. So substantially different than what it was in the past. And then the other thing about the high pressure is they want that droplet of fuel to be very, very small so it burns better. And later, next couple of weeks, I'll do one on piston shapes as well. But all of that has a problem with carbon buildup, and that carbon buildup, how it affects the power and the fuel economy of the vehicle, because it affects it pretty significantly. And then you have, the low tension piston rings. They're thinner, they exert less outward force, and they're more prone to getting stuck on the piston. You got to think when you go lean in an engine with up to 40-to-1 air fuel ratio, stoichiometric air fuel ratio is 14.7 parts air and 1 part fuel. Well, in some of these GDI engines, you're going to see 40-to-1 air fuel ratio. So as that air fuel ratio goes up, the temperature in the combustion chamber goes up proportionately to it. So that means the piston's hotter, and when the piston's hotter, the oil bakes inside the ringland area. And when the oil bakes inside the ringland area, that deposit is what causes the piston rings to stick. The smaller low-tension piston rings are there to reduce frictional drag and also improve fuel efficiency in the engine. And there's unintended consequences. So that unintended consequence is that the piston rings are very, very sensitive to deposit, and ring immobilization and compression loss happens, something called blow-by. So now you have the combustion event. Instead of pushing the piston down, it blows by the rings and gets into the crankcase. So that's all part of the issue with it. And then to depict that in a picture here, in a normal system, the air gets in on top of the ring, pushes the ring down, gets behind the ring, and pushes it up against the cylinder wall to create the oil seal between the cylinder wall and the piston ring. Well, when things go wrong and that oil deposit happens in that area, the gas no longer pushes the piston ring up against the cylinder wall. If you looked at a cross-section of a piston ring, you'll see the new low-tension piston ring on the bottom, is about 40% of the width of a new one. If you looked at the other cross section of a piston ring, it's actually kind of a trapezoidal shape. So it's actually that small little point on the outboard side of the ring is what scrapes the cylinder wall. All of that's heavily impacted by oil deposits.
Piston rings. Love it.
Got
All
it.
right. Thank you, sir. That is the